So hopefully at this point we have a better idea of what makes a microservice, but we still have a little bit of a question of, well, how do we decide how big a microservice is? We haven't really answered that question. So now we're going to start to answer that question a little bit more. So a big part of understanding where to draw the lines between your microservices is all about understanding responsibility. And to do that, we want to go back to Robert C. Martin, also known as Uncle Bob. He came up with something that he calls the single responsibility principle. Now, in actual fact, when he came up with this, he wasn't talking about microservices. He was talking about classes in an object-oriented system. And what he said was that a class should have only one reason to change. That's the single responsibility principle. But this idea works well for microservices. The idea then is that a microservice should have a single responsibility. It should have only one reason to change. So an example of that would be if you have a microservice for managing accounts, or if you have a microservice in our Reactive Barbecue for dealing with orders, or a microservice for the menu. These things have only one responsibility. The menu service deals only with the menu. It doesn't do menus and orders. If you do menus and orders, then it's not a single responsibility. What this does is it means that a change to the internals of one microservice shouldn't necessitate a change to another microservice. So if I go ahead and I want to completely rewrite the reservation service, that shouldn't require me to also make changes to the customer service or to the order service or something else. If I want to completely gut the customer service, which does, the reservation service does depend on the customer service. But again, as long as I maintain the external API for that service, then nobody needs to know that I made any changes. And so that's a big part of how the single responsibility principle applies to microservices. So how do we decide where to draw those lines then? How do we decide where to build our microservices and where the proper responsibilities are? This is where we go back to domain-driven design. Bounded contexts are an excellent place to start building microservices. It doesn't mean we stop there, and we'll get into cases later in the course where we can actually figure out ways to further subdivide even a bounded context. But we start by saying that a bounded context could be a microservice. Bounded contexts define a context in which a specific model applies. And so this gives us an opportunity to say, okay, this bounded context has a specific responsibility and exposes a specific API. So let's leverage that as a microservice. Again, further subdivision of the bounded context is possible, but we won't worry about that at this stage in the course.